Could the Calgary Flames and the Boston Bruins be working on a pretty significant trade, even a blockbuster perhaps? We'll discuss the latest rumors coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have some rumors today that the Calgary Flames and the Boston Bruins may be working on a pretty significant trade, that they've had conversations on and off throughout this offseason, and things might be heating up here a little bit, and we could see a multiplayer deal with a variety of different players possibly being involved here sometime before the end of this NHL offseason. Now, a couple of things that we've talked about for both clubs. One, for Boston, we've said that they might be looking to further address or shake up their blue line. Of course, they lost Torrey Krug to free agency, which we knew they likely wouldn't be able to compete on a mega contract. They just did not have the space, or really, for that matter, I don't think they really had the desire to go up around that $7 million or more mark on a new deal. We don't know about the future of Zdeno Chara. I still have a gut feeling that he returns on another one-year contract, but there is, no certainty on that right now. We don't have a signing to announce, and so until he's signed, you can't say for sure, but it's just hard to imagine him playing in any other uniform, really. But there could be further changes if this trade comes to be, based on what we're hearing here. So the rumored speculation here is that there's at least a one-for-one trade possibly being discussed, and it could also involve multiple pieces. So this trade could go in a variety of ways. Now, the main centerpieces involved on the Calgary side is defenseman Noah Hanifin, possibly Sam Bennett. They'd be the main two pieces, with Hanifin being the main player that the Bruins are interested in. Of course, we know that the Bruins have had a long history of having interest in Noah Hanifin. Of course, he's from the Boston area. He went to Boston College. He was drafted 5th overall by the Carolina Hurricanes, and he's been a player that they've had discussions on multiple times, that they've attempted to make acquisitions here in the past. And we know that they've really been fond as well, like many teams, about bringing in homegrown talent back to play for their Boston Bruins. So obviously, he's a player that they've targeted for some time. Of course, when he was traded out of Carolina to Calgary, there were talks as well that the Bruins were interested at that time, tried to make it happen, but fell short. The Flames had a much better offer for that trade that they completed, which had a lot of players going back and forth there between the Flames and the Hurricanes. So now from the Boston side, it could be a defenseman as Brandon Carlo, as well as possibly Jake Debrusk being involved. Now, a couple of things that this would do. The one-for-one trade that was rumored out there was straight up Carlo for Hanifin. One-for-one, one defenseman for another. You got Brandon Carlo and Noah Hanifin are both 23 years old. Hanifin will be 24 in January, so he's not too far from being 24. He's got one extra year of experience in the NHL over Brandon Carlo, but the main difference here is that Hanifin has a long-term contract, whereas Carlo has 1 year left, and he's an RFA. So for the Calgary Flames, this would bring in a little bit of cost savings for at least year one, and they probably feel like they could likely lock up Carlo on a long-term contract before that contract expires as an RFA, and likely get him signed to a little bit less money than what they're paying Hanifin right now. I mean, today, Brandon Carlo makes $2.85 million, slated to be an RFA next season. Of course, Noah Hanifin signed a 6-year contract at $4.95 million per season. He's 2 years into that, so he's got 4 years at $4.95. So for the Bruins, it gives them some cost certainty for the next 4 years. Of course, Hanifin and Carlo are not exactly the same kind of defenseman. You could probably say Hanifin's a little bit better of a puck mover in that way, so slightly more offensive. Carlo's more known for his defensive play. Hanifin's not exactly letting it up offensively in the NHL, especially if you look at his numbers last year in Calgary. They weren't exactly through the roof by any means, but typically in the past, in his career, I think you can say he's a little bit more offensive than the case of Brandon Carlo. So obviously, like I said, it's a player the Bruins have certainly had their eye on for a long time. It adds another contract, a cost certainty for 4 years with a local product. And in the case of Carlo going to Calgary, they get to save a little bit of money right now, which gives them a little bit more flexibility, with the likelihood that they can probably sign Carlo anywhere from 3, 4, 5 year contract upon renewal of that deal for hopefully less than the 4.95. At least that's probably what they're thinking now. Whether or not that actually would come to be in his exact contract, I'm not sure exactly what he would get for a new deal, but he certainly would get more than he's getting paid today. But I think it's possible that he would be less than a $5 million defenseman, at least for the next few years. So depending on what kind of deal they went with, the Flames could very well get some cost savings, slightly younger, and ever so slightly that is, and they get a right shot defenseman instead of a left side defenseman as well. So clearly that's not a terrible idea in the case of really either squad. I think there's value there for both teams. Now when you start expanding the trade, obviously things get a little bit more complicated, but it could certainly maybe work out for the best here on both of them either. Now, if you look at on the Boston side of things, the winger like Jake Debrusk has been mentioned in trade rumors for the bulk of the offseason. He's a name that keeps coming up frequently. There's a lot of talk that the Bruins very well could get him signed, but they kind of held off right now because they are exploring possibly moving him as well. Of course, we know about Marchand and Pasternak and the injuries they suffered during the playoffs, and that they could possibly miss the beginning of the year. I think Pasternak seems to be more likely in that regard than Marchand from what we're hearing now. Marchand, I think, has healed up enough that he very well could be ready for the start of the year, depending on when it starts. If it does indeed start in January like we're hearing now, then I think from what I'm hearing that Marchand likely could be available either at or near the beginning of the year. So it wouldn't be a significant loss that way. But in the case of Pasternak, he would be out. So you take away Jake Debrusk, depending on what comes back, well, that could certainly leave a shortage in goals. As much as Debrusk has been inconsistent at times, he has typically been a pretty decent secondary scorer for them and has been pretty much around that 20-goal plateau throughout his entry-level contract. Now, he's a restricted free agent, has no contract right now, but many believe he probably would be at a max of $4 million, likely less. I'm thinking probably closer to 3.5 on a probably 2 to 3 year contract, where he would then still be an RFA at the end of the deal with arbitration rights as well. So, I mean, obviously, if you throw together a package of Brandon Carlo and Jake Debrusk, let's say Debrusk gets signed somewhere between 3.5, 3.75 around there. You add Carlo's contract to it, you're looking at just over $6 million. You take away Noah Hanifin on the Calgary side, that's almost the hair shy of $5 million. And then the other player, as I said, that was kind of mentioned here in trade rumors a bit lately for the Flames was Sam Bennett, who's got 1 year left before being an RFA, making over $2 million. So the money works. If you were to do a 2-for-2 swap, I'm not sure that things are completely even, and I'm not saying that that's exactly how the deal would go. But if you just look at it from a cap perspective, at least, there'd be enough money going out on either side to kind of make things work from a financial perspective, depending on how the teams felt about it. Clearly, there could be other prospects or picks or some other pieces involved here to kind of make things to the point where obviously each team would feel it was a fair trade and want to make the deal happen. So, I mean, Bennett's a player in Calgary side that's never really lived up to that really high-end potential that he was drafted with, but he's found a way to be an effective NHL player, just not the kind of player that they thought they were getting when he was drafted. He's certainly, willing to play hard, drops the gloves occasionally. He seems to show up a lot more in the playoffs as well. His regular season Bennett is not quite the same as playoff Sam Bennett. Playoff Sam Bennett seems to pick up the pace and get the job done when it matters most, which for a team like Boston, who's been in the playoffs year after year, is certainly something that's important to them, especially when you look at some of their other players who might not have been building that consistency here as of yet. I know there's times when the consistency was an issue for Jake Debrusk. So obviously, Jake Debrusk, I think it's fair to say, has a better offensive outlook than Bennett does. You get Carlo and Hanifin, slightly two different types of defensemen. I'm not completely sure, like I said, that this would be a 2-for-2 swap, or like I said, it could even drop back to being a 1-for-1 Hanifin Carlo. But either way, there's enough reports out there indicating these teams are definitely talking, and these are the names that are rumored to be involved in these conversations. We could have ourselves a pretty significant trade here in the near future. Now, the other thing with the Flames, this is not surprising at all that these are the players that are involved here back before the NHL was paused. I know it seems like an eternity ago when we had an NHL trade deadline leading into what we thought was going to be a normal playoff season, which obviously never worked out that way. But at that deadline, the Flames were heavily involved with talks with the New Jersey Devils. They were really, really close to acquiring a package of Taylor Hall and Sami Vatanen. So obviously that would have brought in a top scoring winger. Of course, Hall's been linked to Calgary before. Obviously he was born in Calgary, spent a lot of his growing up in Ontario, but essentially that's kind of his hometown for where he was born and initially started out life. And Vatanen obviously would have been another defenseman, adding some great depth there on the back end. Of course, they later made some different moves instead, but that deal never worked out. Of course, we know Taylor Hall ended up going to New Jersey, and Sami Vatanen ended up being traded to the Carolina Hurricanes in separate trades. But the Flames were in on the Devils there on that deal, and apparently it came pretty close to making it happen. I don't know exactly what stopped it from happening, but the players that were rumored to be involved on the Calgary side were Hanifin and Bennett. So obviously the Flames are open to trading these guys if they came that close before. I mean, Bennett's been in and out of the trade rumor mill for the last couple of years. Hanifin's kind of a little bit newer to it, and it's not so much that they want to move on from him, but if you take a look at what his offensive output was and like just the way he's fit in with the Flames since signing that big 6-year deal, I'm just not sure they're completely in love with what the contract for what he gives them for what he signed for. So if they could find a way to kind of change things up on that back end, certainly seems like the Flames are more than open to it. And a team like New Jersey, when they were close to making an acquisition, you'd think a player like Hanifin would have been attractive to them. Still relatively young, has a fair bit of NHL experience, some cost certainty on the contract for 4 more years. So, obviously they didn't want to do the deal, but there was, close call and making a major blockbuster deal between those two teams. And instead, those same players could end up going off to the Boston Bruins, possibly in exchange for guys like Carlo or Debrusk. So obviously this could be some pretty significant NHL trade. We haven't had a major blockbuster really too much. I mean, we've had some good trades in the offseason so far, but this will certainly rank up there as one of the bigger trades of the offseason for sure, if something should actually go down. So out of all these players, the only one that somewhat surprises me being in the rumor mill here is Brandon Carlo. The other 3, like I said, are players that have been in the mix here and in talks before, so nothing too surprising. I can see how this deal could be a benefit to both sides. My only concern from the Boston side mostly would be that secondary scoring in the forward group. I'm not sure that Sam Bennett can really give you what Jake Debrusk is going to give you, so I wonder if the Bruins would want something extra added in there, or maybe a change of player in there as well. So we'll see. Like I said, obviously the deal hasn't happened yet, so clearly these discussions are still, just that. They're just discussions, and if they were that in love with the deal, it would have happened by now. But we will see what happens, but let me know your thoughts on this potential blockbuster trade. If you want to change things up, if you feel each side would benefit from having different players involved, certainly leave me your mock trades down below in the comments, and we can discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. And give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.